Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle Podcast. I'm John Schmeelk. It's all brought to you by PSEG, energy efficiency for game time and anytime. Visit PSEG.com/Giants for discounts, rebates, and home energy assessments. And this week's Giants Huddle is the beat reporter for The Athletic for the New York Football Giants, Dan Duggan. Dan, what's going on, man? Good to see you.
Good to see you, John. Feels like we were, just getting back from Philadelphia a couple weeks ago, and now we're already turning the page to the offseason. Happens fast, huh?
Yeah, it goes fast. There really is no offseason anymore. And even though the combine's coming, which is going to be a lot of draft talk, Dan, I have a feeling most of the discussion out there around the Giants is going to be around free agency. We've seen all the news over the past week or so with reports, conjecture, Daniel Jones switching agents. How does that affect Saquon? Why don't you kind of put that into a little package for me, and then we'll dive into it a little bit deeper.
Yeah, all right. I mean, where to begin? But yeah, so it's definitely, I think all along we knew this was going to be a very interesting offseason. The fact that you had Saquon and Daniel Jones hitting free agency at the same time. If you just had one of them, it really wouldn't be that complicated because you have the tag in your back pocket and you hope to work out a long-term deal. If you don't, you tag them. The fact that you kind of have these dual negotiations with high stakes and high profile players makes it really interesting. So I mean, I guess we'll start with Daniel Jones. I mean, he's definitely priority 1A, and Joe Schoen hasn't run from that fact. It's the quarterback, so they want to get a deal done with him. So I don't need to tell you the dates, but obviously March 7th is when the franchise tag deadline kicks in. So they have to get a long-term deal done by then, or you have to assume they'll tag him. They're not going to just let him test the marker. You can't put that position in limbo like that. So March 7th is going to be a huge date. We're going to be speaking about that a lot over the next week and a half, hour long, until we get to that point. But so with Daniel Jones, if they get something done with him, then it makes the Saquon Barkley situation simpler because you still will have the tag at their disposal. The problem really becomes if they can't get a long-term deal with Daniel Jones done and they have to tag him, now what do you do with Saquon? Because then it's either he accepts your offer or he says, you know what, there's 31 other teams out there. Well, let me see what I can find elsewhere. So that's where I think it's really interesting. Daniel Jones is the first domino, and if that falls, I think it's kind of a clean process. If they can't work something out with him and to tag him, that's when things get a little spicier.
Well, what's your feel based on everything you're reporting, what you're hearing, the chances that they can get something done long-term with Daniel before that tag deadline?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one because obviously, as you mentioned, you changed agents. So it's kind of hard to even get a feel for, where things stand. Numbers have been thrown around. And I will say this, I think people overreact to these things because let's just, look at it in a vacuum. I mean, the Giants have the tag, as we said, in their back pocket. That's $32 million. So if Daniel Jones wants to get, let's just say 38, that might be where both sides end up being comfortable. He can't come in at 38. He has to come in high. So if, the $45 million figure that's out there, I mean, you look at Kyler Murray, his draft class hasn't won any playoff games. I mean, obviously his stats may have been better, but, you could look at him if you're Daniel Jones, say, he's getting $46 million a year. Why am I settling for, 10 less than him or 8 less than him? So if you start there, the Giants are starting at the other end. And again, it's a negotiation. You hope to meet somewhere in the middle. And of course, it's not just the average annual value. You got the how long is it, which I think is going to be interesting with Jones more than some other guys. I think for the team, you would like it to be a long-term deal because then you can spread the cap charges around. But then how long are you actually committing to him? Because there might be a feeling, let's give ourselves an out year in a year or two. And if you do a long 5-year deal, usually you're pretty much locked in for 3 years. So they have to weigh that as well. So where do I think today? How do I think this plays out? Again, it's really kind of in the dark because again, I couldn't even talk to his agents if I wanted to. We just found out today who they actually are as we're recording this. But I think it probably ends in a tag. And listen, the tag isn't binding. They could still work out a deal. And I think really what happens, deadlines always drive business in this league. And if you recall a couple years ago, Leonard Williams got tagged for a second time. And then they came to a long-term agreement a week later, right when free agency was about to start, or the tampering period started, or whatever it may be. That might be the real deadline. Jones might say, "Yeah, let's just do the tag." And then when the Giants are sitting there "Hey, we have $32 million of our cap space tied up in one guy. Maybe we'll, more willing to give a little bit on whatever the hang-up is, and maybe to get that deal done the Monday that free agency, unofficially starts. Maybe something like that. But I think at the tag deadline, I think he ends up getting tagged.
Yeah, you mentioned deal length, and I do think that's interesting, right? I feel like almost 3 years gives the player another chance to cash in. It also gives the team a chance to get out if it's not working the way they want. I almost kind of feel like that kind of feels like the sweet spot to me. Maybe it's a 5-year deal and you can get out after 3 without it killing your cap. That's something you can look at. I think there probably is a way to go here because we're going to see this quarterback market reset, right? You have Lamar coming up. You have Herbert coming up. You have Burrow coming up. I think these players are, and we saw Dak Prescott do this too, and he's with the same agency group where he
Right.
wanted the short-term deal so then he could cash in again later. But it also works in the team's favor too, to your point.
Yeah, no, I think also we all have to train ourselves not to get sticker shock here because the numbers sound so big, but we have to realize where this cap is going. COVID is over, the new TV deals are kicking in. Like it's going to be astronomical. Like wait till you see what guys like Herbert and Burrow get this offseason and whatever happens with Lamar. I mean, they're going to blow whatever Daniel Jones ends up at out of the water. So, you might say he signs it first. You say, oh my gosh, he's the ninth highest paid quarterback. Like 2 or 3 weeks later, he might be the 13th or 14th,
Yeah.
depending on how other deals that get done. I think the interesting one that'll to kind of gauge, and it could happen before Jones, is Derek Carr. Is
Great
he the
point.
guy who like kind of finally establishes a middle class? Because there isn't one. If you're a quarterback, you're either like a veteran retread, a rookie, or a guy at the top of the market. Like, is there a sweet spot there? And could Derek Carr establish that? Because obviously he was due 40 in Vegas. They didn't want to pay him that. Now he's doing his little tour. If he gets like 30, then you would feel like that probably hurts Daniel Jones's leverage. Because like, hey, if you go test the market, there isn't probably going to be some huge deal. If Derek Carr gets 40 somewhere else, you say like, listen, supply and demand, people are going to pay for quality quarterbacks. So that'd be fascinating. Now we don't know if that will work out. Probably won't work out before the Giants have to make a decision. But I feel like he'd be an interesting trial balloon just to see what he gets on the open market.
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you on that. And I guess the last thing I'll ask you about Daniel before we head over to Saquon then is from a team building perspective, right? We know once you pay the quarterback, you have to make other sacrifices, right? The Chiefs pay Patrick Mahomes, they have to let Tyreek Hill go so they could build other parts of the team. So I guess the question is, once you pay him, then what's your team building strategy? Do you then have to rely on the draft, much like the Chiefs did this year, right? They had so many rookies on rookie deals playing for them. Or do you say, well, look, if we get Daniel here, we want to exactly see what he can do. So we have to go in and invest in a big receiver. So does it make sense to then trade your 25th pick and maybe not the best draft class to get a really good wide receiver to see exactly how good Daniel can be? I see both sides of the approach there.
Yeah, no, and it's fascinating. They're in such a sticky spot. You would feel so much better if he had like one more year on his rookie deal, and not to go hindsight. I think declining the fifth-year option was the right choice, but it sure would be nice to have that. There'd still be, what was it, $22 million. It wouldn't be chump change, but it'd be nice if they had one more year to kind of build around him and get a full evaluation. Like this is definitely the guy. So they're kind of having to obviously go on a projection here. That's why I think the tag would be bad news for the Giants, because you're just not going to have a lot of space to go sign, because you don't have to just get Daniel Jones weapon. You have to upgrade that defense too, and that's going to cost money too. You can't draft all of these guys and expect them to be impact players. I think the draft does need to be still the avenue, even if you re-sign Daniel Jones to a big contract. It may be tempting to say let's go trade and do our Stephon Diggs trade because we're going to make Bills parallels till the end of time here as long as Joe Shane's in office. But I think they need to find their Justin Jefferson. Again, way easier said than done, but like they're in that point. Like if you can get a stud wide receiver and have him in his rookie contract, that's where the bargain is. There's the talk with Buffalo saying how they had Jamar Chase and all these guys because they're drafting a lot earlier than 25. Don't get me wrong, it's hard to get that guy there, but I think that's where they need to focus. I don't think they can go all in and say like we're gonna start giving up draft picks. I think they have too many holes. I think, but that's where it gets, as you mentioned, with the quarterback paying him top dollar. That's where it gets a little sticky because you have to compromise other places. So really, if you're going to pay Daniel Jones that much money, he needs to raise his level. I mean, I think we saw him take a big jump in year one of this Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka offense. The good news, Kafka being back. Now you need to see another jump and another. Like he needs to keep going up. It can't just be that. Can't be the best we're going to see of him. He needs to keep growing and developing. And obviously, if they give the guy 150, $200 million, they're doing so believing that that'll be the case. So they have to trust their evaluation and hope they're right.
No, I'm with you, by the way. I think the draft is kind of how you have to do it. And you hope you hit on these picks late in the first round, second round, and then hope you can find some gems in there, which in wide receiver, I think history shows that you can.
Right.
Let's go to Saquon. Let's assuming you can't tag him, right? Let's say you have to tag Jones and you can't tag Saquon. I think it's an interesting play and how that's going to work out. It's such a deep running back market, Dan. There are so many good free agent running backs, and there are so many good running backs in this draft. I could argue there's 5 or 6 starting running backs day one out of this draft class if you look at the guys coming out. So how do you think that impacts the market in free agency? Will he go out there and be able to find not even a McCaffrey contract, but a $14 million contract? How do you think that market's going to dictate what Saquon eventually signs for?
No, and I think that's certainly the case. You look, it's not usually this strong of a veteran running back class. I mean, you could say he's not even the best back to hit the market based on what Josh Jacobs just did last year in Vegas, and he's obviously hitting the market. And you got Miles Sanders, you have all of these guys, a quality running David Montgomery. I could go down the list that you could say, like, is it worth paying one of these guys, like you said, 14 million a year, or we can get somebody else for 8 or 10? And then you also have some teams that just won't pay that much for running back, period, because they'll get the guys in the draft, as you mentioned, and just run them into the ground for 4 or 5 years and move on. So no, he's in a very interesting spot. Like, what his market will be fascinating, because he's a big name. He's obviously produced at a really high level, at least in 2 of his seasons when he's been fully healthy. But is there going to be that? Like, I don't think there's going to be a Christian McCaffrey type offer out there if he hits the free agent market. But he's also just a unique guy. How often does a guy with his star power hit the market? Assuming he does. Let's just play it out that that's how it breaks down. I'm struggling to think of a parallel. Like, who is kind of been a similar profile player who just hits free agency? Like, I feel like that's sort of a rarity. So it'll be interesting if that is how it plays out.
Do you think the Giants, if they are able to, would tag Saquon?
Yeah, I mean, I think the tag, like I said earlier, I think it's worse for the Giants to tag Daniel Jones. I mean, listen, if Daniel Jones, you'd rather have a long-term deal, but $32 million in your pocket, not a bad outcome. I think for Saquon, it's better for the Giants and worse for him, because, I mean, there's been reports, and, I can say I've heard the same things, that it was, the offer at the buy was in the $12 million a year range, maybe 12 and some change. So then you're talking the tag at 10.1. You're getting less than that average value would have been, and you're getting none of the long-term security that would have come with that. So for him, that's like really a worst case outcome. I mean, carrying $10 million on your cap for 1 year for running back, not ideal, but for the team, it's like, if you're bringing Daniel Jones back, it'd be nice to have Saquon with him, and just kind of, it's a tough part for him. It'd make him prove it again. Like, this was obviously a big year for him. He had to prove he could stay healthy, prove he could be productive again. He was. So then to really not truly cash in off of that, that'd be a tough pill to swallow if I'm him. And so if you're the team, you have to also factor that in. Like, is it going to hurt some relations? I mean, that's just part of the tag. And I mean, I think they're all professionals. They would deal with it, but I don't think that's the outcome Saquon won. I think if you're the team, though, and you are able to get something done with Daniel Jones before the tag deadline, that makes you have a much harder line with Saquon. Because, listen, Pat, we'll just tag you. If you don't want to meet the, again, whatever it is, let's just say it's 3 years, 12 million per, something like that. If you don't want that, then we'll just tag you for 10. That might make Saquon say, you know what, actually, that offer you had doesn't look so bad anymore.
Yeah, and then I guess I'll go back to the team building part of this, right? You want to get as much around Daniel as possible, and if you get those 2 guys done, that's a big portion of what you can spend in the salary cap. You're just not going to have a lot of money. There's not a bunch of wide receivers, quite frankly, that are free agents that are really that valuable, and the ones that are, since there aren't many, you're going to get overpaid. So what's your priority, Dan, and how do you go about trying to build things around Daniel? Because the argument is, look, Daniel's numbers didn't jump off the page, but because they didn't, because there wasn't enough around them for him to make explosive plays.
Right.
So then what do you do to allow his talent to shine through? So he plays for a guy that you might pay, 35 plus million or whatever the number ends up being.
Yeah.
Is it protection on the interior offensive line? Where do you get the receiver? How do you prioritize it? How do you go about it? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, so I think that point, before I get into like the positions, is that's why long-term deals are so imperative, I think, for the team as far as the team building. Because if you can get Daniel and Saquon without using the tag, that's obviously the best case scenario. Because listen, it's not great to kick cap down the road, but I think you start seeing how, let's just say, a team like Philly has done it and it's worked out pretty well for them. I mean, the bill comes due eventually, but again, as I talked earlier, that cap is going to skyrocket. So $1 today is not worth $1 tomorrow. So I think if they can get both those guys in long-term deals, kind of backload them, which is, it's not always my preferable route, but I'm kind of coming around on it again with the way the cap is going to go up and the way the Giants books are. They don't have a bunch of big contracts, signed for the future. So it might be the exception to do this year. So that way you can build around those 2 guys. You can get them both back on long-term deals, really lower that year 1 cap hit. That does give you some flexibility. So yeah, then definitely they need to find a way to get a wide receiver. And I don't know that there's a number 1 wide receiver available. Obviously in free agency, I don't see one. The trade option is probably the one, Brandon Ayuk or T. Higgins, someone like that. But then you're giving up a lot, and you have to. Is he going to have, an AJ Brown type impact, a Tyreek Hill type impact on your team? I don't know that those 2 guys would. So then you say, oh, you just take one of 25 is gonna be that guy. So that's a tough one. The wide receiver 1 debate is tough, and that's why I did a 10-step offseason plan. And again, like I said, we always look back to what they did in Buffalo. I could see it to be more like the year before they trade for Diggs, where they signed like the Cole Beasleys and John Browns. Like, get a couple middle-class wide receivers. At least it's going to make your overall group better, but it's not going to give you that one bona fide alpha wide receiver, which they certainly could use. But then, if you're not going to spend it all wide receiver, do you spend a little on interior offensive line? But I really think defense is the spot where they're going to need to invest in, because obviously that linebacking core was very weak, and there's some guys out there I think you could fill in for not crazy money that would just upgrade that group. The cornerbacks position that needs to have some investment. We talked about the free agency. We haven't even talked about Julian Love, another guy who's going to command a few bucks and was really valuable. So you'd like to bring him back, but he's obviously third in the pecking order. Again, we haven't really discussed him, not just on this podcast, but in general. He's really taking a back seat to these other two guys. So there's a lot of balls in the air for Joe Schoen. Like, I don't envy him this offseason. He's got cap space, as he didn't last year, but now he's got to figure out how to use it, and it's not going to be a simple puzzle to put together.
Hey, Giant fans, take your fans to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. No, look, and this is not easy. I mean, you're 100% right, man. Like, these are tough decisions. You got to manage the cap. You're right. The cap's going up, and I think you feel better about backloading the contracts for the guys you know a lot about too. They know about Daniel, they know about Saquon, so you probably feel more confident of backing some of that money up. But let's jump to the defense. I think corner is probably still your number one spot, Dan, or do you have middle linebacker as the number one spot?
I think I'd probably say middle linebacker, because I just feel like that position is really, Blake Martinez was obviously a sort of a brief respite at that position, but for a long time here, this organization just has not had great inside linebacker play, and I think you kind of get what you pay for. So I think it's time to, make an investment there. I don't think they need to get, Tremaine Edmonds and top market money, but there's some guys in that middle class. I think you can get a quality middle linebacker for a reasonable rate. I think that's a position that just absolutely needs to be addressed. You can't keep signing guys off the street or using day 3 picks and trying to get through a season like that. I don't think that's going to work out. But no, cornerback for sure, because obviously you have Dory Jackson, where he's in the last year of his deal. I think he's a guy they just like play it out. Like, I don't think they need to do anything crazy, extend him or restructure. Like, it's a big cap hit, but you can probably stomach it. I'm not sure I want to extend him because he's got the injury history. Like, let's just play that out. You have one quality corner, but the same thing, like, you need to upgrade that other spot, especially in Wink's defense, where corner is, so vitally important. Like, I'm still convinced that if things had worked out differently and Sauce Gardner was there, they would have run to the podium with the number 5 pick for him last year.
I think you're probably right about that, Dan.
Yeah. And so now I don't think, again, it's not, those guys don't come along too often. Now you're picking 25, but that's another position, even in the first round, doesn't have to be wide receiver. I think if the cornerback market breaks that way, that could be a spot. Because I think Joe Schoen is going to use premium picks on premium positions. So I think, wide receiver, cornerback, obviously, you're not taking a offensive tackle, hopefully, for many, many years here. But, like, they've kind of attacked, even just early in his tenure, edge rusher. They've gone for the premium spot. So I think that's a position that certainly, Fabian Moreau did a nice job stepping in. You have some young guys who, have some intrigue, some upside. But I think that would be a position, at least in free agency. I want to throw a few bucks at that to have a solid number 2 corner that can play with Adoree. And obviously, if some young guy overtakes him, it's not the end of the world. You can always, what to say, you can never have too many corners, but definitely a position I think that needs to be addressed in free agency for sure.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Adoree and Leonard. You already gave your take on Adoree. So how do you think they handle Leonard Williams here? Big cap number, but it's a guy you can't afford to let go either. Like, when Howard Cross and I during the games used to joke, when either Leonard Williams or Dexter Lawrence were on the field, they couldn't stop the run, but pretty much ever. It was as bad as it was terrible. So how do you think they work that out? Is that an extension then to lower that 1-year cap hit and spread it out a little bit, you think?
Yeah, that one's complicated. Like I said, Adoree, I think his cap hit's around $20 million. Leonard's just 32. I mean, you're talking like a quarterback. We're talking the franchise tag for a quarterback. If you tag Daniel, you got him and Leonard taking up $64 million on your cap next year. That's a little untenable. But they're in a tough spot because he's a quality player. I mean, this year, notwithstanding, he's been a very durable, reliable player. Like, plays like 80% of the snaps at defensive tackle, great guy in the locker room, works hard, all those great things. But it's a big number. So yeah, you have to look at it. He's 28, 29, I want to say. So he's getting up there a little bit, but I think you can probably do a short-term extension, like maybe 3-year deal. I was looking at like Grady Jarrett, signed like a 3-year, $50 million deal once his last year. Like, kind of a similar player, similar stage of his career. Like, if you could get something like that done, that way, again, you're pushing the can down the road. I keep doing this here. It's not ideal, but I think that's sort of where they are right now. Get that cap hit down this year, because just keeping him at, like I said, $32 million. That's what you'd be paying your quarterback on the franchise tag. That's not what you want to be paying an interior defensive lineman, even a quality one. But no, I don't think they can cut him. And I know Leonard kind of fueled the fire of a pay cut in his post season press conference, but I think that was kind of spur of the moment. Listen, we've seen how his agents have managed negotiations. They've not left too many pennies on the table, so I don't think they would be doing that. Because listen, if the Giants come to him for a pay cut, Leonard just says no, and then what do? The line always I've heard from executives: if you go to give a guy a pay cut, you have to be prepared to cut him, and I don't think the Giants are prepared to cut him. So you're going to go and test the waters there to get like $4 million off your cap. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think an extension is probably the most likely outcome there. But that's a nice listen. Like I said, Joe Schoen's going to earn his keep this offseason. He does not have a bunch of easy decisions to make, and that's another tough one that's in front of him.
Yeah, a couple more, Dan. So then what do you think generally free agency is going to look like? I go back to your answer about the wide receivers, maybe some middle-class guys. Is that what you think it's going to look like on defense? It's not a star-studded free agency class. So what do you think Shane's going to do, and how do you think he's going to handle, and what his priorities going to be?
Yeah, and I think that's fine because I think we've found like stars that are free agencies, always looks good in March, and then a year or two later, you're like, how do we pay this guy that much money? So I think being a middle class, bargain bin shopper, because listen, their biggest free agent acquisitions are most likely going to be internal guys. I'm sure in their dream offseason, if the money works out, they're going to re-sign Daniel Jones, they're going to re-sign Saquon Barkley, they're going to re-sign Julian Love. So there's going to be a ton of money left over if you do those moves. But yeah, I think just kind of calculated strikes to strengthen some weaknesses. Because they had some positions this year that as much success as they had were like barely NFL caliber, like the defensive line after Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence, the inside linebackers in general, like cornerback 2 spot. Like there were positions that were really replacement level players. So I think if you can just spend some money there, not crazy money, maybe get some guys who are young and ascending, you get on them a little early, something like that. But I don't think they're going to make some big swing for the fences and have some, $20 million wide receiver contract, anything like that. I think they're going to be calculated about it. And again, I think the real spending is going to go to the guys who are already on their roster.
The Giants' official connected TV streaming app, Giants TV, brings original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV is free on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and the Giants mobile app. Dan, it's funny. I don't think either one of us thought we'd be having these types of conversations at this point last year. I think we all kind of figured it would be frankly a bad year, and this would be like the start of almost like a ground up rebuilding process. And now it's kind of in this weird in-between part, right? Like, they're not, and Joe Schoen has said this, right? We're not a player away from the Super Bowl, but you have a lot of good players you're going to have to spend money on relatively soon, whether it's Daniel or Saquon this year, Dexter next year, Andrew Thomas, McKinney the following year, whoever you want to talk about, right? So they're in this like in between, like we're not competing, but we have to spend money like we are, but we still have to add pieces. It's just a weird thing to reconcile. And I've gone back. It's hard to find teams that have kind of been in this spot and figured out a way to do it. You know what I mean?
No, I mean, totally. That's why it's funny. I'm saying he has such a hard offseason. I think it was, if you asked me a year ago, I'm like, year 2 for Joe Schoen's going to be beautiful. He's going to like clear the deck. He's going to, be in the top 5, draft his quarterback, have a rookie quarterback contract to build around. Like it's going to be easy. And now, yeah, like the downside of having some unexpected success is you kind of have to recalibrate. You're not in striking range to get Will Levis or whoever they would have fallen in love with, like they did with Josh Allen in Buffalo. They can't just follow that Buffalo blueprint. Well, actually, it's funny, in Buffalo they kind of did have the year 1 success, and they did blow it up. Certainly does not feel like that's the plan here. I mean, he's openly professed that Daniel Jones is their guy, but it does make it different and challenging. You said there's not a real clear blueprint of like teams that have been in this in between phase where you have a quarterback who you're not like he's a superstar, but you think he's good enough to win with. Like, how do you build from there? And yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, like you mentioned, some of those young guys. I mean, I think those are guys who I think their contracts will probably be addressed this offseason too, because I think one thing good organizations do is they're proactive in locking down these homegrown players, so you don't have situations where, like I tweeted earlier in the offseason, it blew my mind. Since the 2011 draft, the only guys who've gotten only draft picks who've gotten second contracts here are Odell Beckham Jr. and obviously that didn't last too long, and Sterling Shepard. That's it. Like that's amazing. Like that's not a trend you want to continue. That's the reason why the team obviously went through the low times they went through. So now you have some young guys. You can't let them all get to free agency and then some team Washington gives the type of offer to Landon Collins. Someone does that to Xavier McKinney next year, and all of a sudden you just lost a quality safety who had been in your program for 4 years. Like I think a guy like McKinney, I'd try and lock him up this year, even coming off the hand, maybe get a little discount because of that. Dexter Lawrence, I definitely think he'll be a priority because they don't want to let him get to free agency next year or get in the tag game, all that. So I think you take care of him, and he could really be proactive. Andrew Thomas, even though they have him for next year plus the 5th-year option, I might consider going there because, again, all these deals are going to be based off the market. So if you let some other left tackle sign a crazy contract, well, now that's going to become the baseline for Andrew Thomas or even for Dexter Lawrence. There's a lot of defensive tackles, in his class. Quinn Williams, Jeffrey Simmons, Christian Wilkins, all these guys, they're going to be coming up for extensions. So you almost want to beat them to the punch in some ways. So you kind of get the best deal, and they're not, they're negotiating off yours rather than vice versa. So no, I think it's like I kind of keep saying it's a really interesting offseason for Joe Schoen. And to your point of this question, after I rambled there for 5 minutes, it's not the one we would have expected. I think he probably came in with a plan. He didn't pick up the 50-year option. He signed Tyrod Taylor. It's like, all right, I got my bridge quarterback. I'm going to draft the quarterback. I'm going to build around that. And it's like, whoop, you got to change on the fly when your team wins 9 games and goes on the road and wins a playoff game. It makes it a little tougher to go down that route. So now he's had to pivot, and now that's where we are now. That's why it's hard to figure how they're going to handle everything, because there isn't a clear roadmap to follow, at least from the outside.
You mentioned Julian Love before. Do you think he might get caught in the wash here a little bit with Saquon and Daniel and the money you might have to commit to them? Or, I know they loved him. I know Wink loves him. He's the kind of represents as a guy everything they want this locker room to be. I think Julian wants to be back. Do you think they will figure out a number that'll work for both sides?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because like to all the points you made, I think they do love him. I think they'd love to have him back. I think he would love to be here. But the safety market's tricky too. And that's kind of blown up the last couple of years. And thing that always happens in these negotiations, it's all about comps. So the team is going to say, we think you're similar to this player who signed for this. The player and the agent say, well, we think we're similar to this player and he signed for that. And the safety market's kind of all over the map. If I'm Julian Love, I'm sitting there saying, Amani Hooker was just like me, a 4th-round pick in 2019, had nowhere near the production I had. He signed a 3-year, $30 million extension with Tennessee last year. So why would I settle for a dime less than that? Because now the Niners say, well, just because Tennessee made a mistake, we're not going to do the same. So that's definitely where it gets interesting. Like, I think he's probably like a $7.5 million a year player. Like, there's guys who signed for that at that position. I think that's probably where he fits. But he might look at it and say, listen, I'm coming off a career years. My first time as a full-time starter, I really produced. If I get in the market, maybe I can get 10, maybe I can get 12, but he might get in the market and only get 5. You don't know. It's definitely a gamble. So if they make a legitimate, strong offer, I think if I'm him, I would probably jump on it, because I think it's a good place for him, and I think it's just a good defense. He's been here, he's established, but he is an interesting guy. Like you said, that term "caught in the wash" could certainly happen, because he's definitely not the top priority right now. I'm sure if Drew Rosenhaus is calling Joe Schoen, it's like, yeah, let me get back in like a week, because I got these other numbers running through my head. But no, I think that's something they have to be careful with, because you never know. Guy hits the market. It only takes one team. His hometown team, the Chicago Bears, have $1 bazillion in cap space. Maybe they blow him away. You never know. So that is something. He's a guy that I think will be interesting to monitor how his market develops, because he's obviously not getting tagged, so he's going to have that opportunity to test the market unless they hammer something out before free agency.
2 on the draft. I'm not going to ask you about players, but just strategy. We talked about the wide receivers, so let's start there. A lot of these guys, some people believe, might be kind of slot specific. They have Wan'Dale Robinson, but he's coming off of an ACL. How much do you think they're going to think about that aspect of this in terms of fit with Wan'Dale? Are they just going to draft the best guy and say, Mike Groh, Brian Dable, Mike Kafka, figure it out? How do you think that might impact the type of wide receiver they want to pick, and when they might want to pick him, quite frankly, just based on Robinson being here and him being a priority player for them as a 2nd-round pick in the draft last year?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like I said, thank you for asking me specifically about players. I'm nowhere near as deep into the weeds on that stuff, at least not yet, as you are. But no, wide receiver is a position I've paid attention to a little bit more. If you're gonna ask me interior line, I might be in a little trouble. But yeah, I think it's a consideration you have to have, because remember last year when they drafted Wan'Dale and they had Kadarius Toney, and it was like, oh no, it's no problem to be a fit. And obviously, it never really became an issue for a multitude of reasons. But so I think that there is some feeling that they can just fit guys in their offense. But at the same time, maybe they kind of knew Kadarius Toney wasn't going to be here too long, so they didn't care that much. Whereas Wan'Dale, obviously, I think they believe is going to have a big role going forward. I mean, they used to, whoever was a top 50 pick on him, he has to be part of the equation. So I think if there's a slot only guy, that'd be really tough for me to take at 25. If you're getting like 4th, 5th round, like whatever, that guy might be your punt returner. He might be the Richie James replacement, let alone supplanting Wan'Dale. But you're talking those first 2 rounds, I think it has to be a consideration. I think in an ideal world, you get a 6'4" true, X wide receiver to play outside. I think that's what this offense needs. But there are a lot of those guys who seem like they're kind of hybrids. I think with this offense, with this creativity, this coaching staff, you can make it work. It might not be ideal, but I think that there's a place where they probably still do that.
Do you think they would consider a big time playmaking tight end? Kafka and Dable both come from systems where they played 11 personnel most of the time, right? That's what they did. But to your point, the wide receiver free agent class isn't very good. The wide receiver draft class, isn't as good as it has been in past years with, top guys. But it's an awesome tight end draft class, right? You might have 3 tight ends go in the first round this year. Who knows? Do you think they would consider a really good pass catching tight end and pivot to more of a 12 personnel grouping team? Do you think that's something they would consider? You think that's too out of character for what Dable and Kafka have done in the past?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's an interesting kind of thought exercise, at least. But yeah, I feel like that'd be going a little too far against the grain of what they are and what they want to be. Because even if you think of last season, obviously they did that heavy personnel early, which I think they were just trying to figure out what they could do to make it work. But when they started hitting their stride later in the year, it was 11
All
personnel,
11.
11 personnel. Once Bellinger came back, it was just Bellinger and 11 personnel all day. And I think, you got a nice value there as a 4th-round pick. He was a quality guy. You can kind of a two-way tight end. So you're kind of set with that role. For sure, if you can get a dynamic guy, I'm going to use Evan Ingram's name, just, and hopefully Giants fans don't cringe, but like that type of a compliment, yeah, that'd be nice. I don't know that there's a guy who would fit that mold at 25. And also, I just think that tight end position, you said it's a great class. I think history has shown that you can get some value there a little later. So I think that I'd be surprised they went that route in the first round. I do think that premium positions, cornerback, wide receiver, there is, maybe there's an edge rusher where, hey, you can never commit those guys either. I think tight end, I'd be surprised. I know there's some really highly regarded guys in this class, but I think that's probably a spot you feel good about Bellinger. You feel you're probably going to be more of an 11 personnel team. We can just invest another mid-round pick, get another guy, and maybe he's more of a complement to Bellinger, like I said, more of an athletic guy, and that's probably the way they go. But it is definitely something interesting to consider. It's so different now for us, covering a team that's picking 25th. It's been a while. Usually you can really narrow it down to a finite number of positions and names. At 25, I mean, the board is wide open at this juncture for sure.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I mean, there's no way to know. Before we say goodbye, real quick, your thoughts on the rookie class on Neal, Thibodeau, and then everyone else pretty much got hurt. But your thoughts generally on the group and kind of where they're heading.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my answer. It's hard to say because so many of them ended up, in knee braces. So that was disappointing. And obviously, the good news is, in some respects, a lot of them got hurt early. So, Darian Beavers, Marcus McKeith, and these types of guys should be ready to go, by the time camp opens. We're not sure exactly on like Wandale's timeline, but it's almost going to have like 2 rookie classes because a lot of these guys didn't get a lot of burn. For the guys who did play, I think I'll stick to the first rounders. Guys, you saw some promise from like a Cordell Flott, and I obviously touched on Bellinger already. I think Thibodeau showed a lot of signs of, what they thought he was, and I think they still think there's a lot more there. So I think, they feel good about that pick. I know the sack numbers didn't knock anyone's socks off, but that's not really what happens in Wink Martindale's system. They don't have a lot of 15 sack seasons in this. You look back at his time in Baltimore, even with guys like Judon and Zadarius Smith, they just didn't have a guy like that. It's more of a system type thing, and I think he played his role well. Neal's the question mark. You can't sugarcoat it. He had a rough rookie year. I know a lot of people said, well, so did Andrew Thomas. That's great. Like if he follows the Andrew Thomas blueprint, like sign me up. Everyone will take that. But there's no guarantee that'll happen. So I think he's got a big offseason ahead of him. Like he needs to get better. And there's no reason to think he won't. He's obviously a physical specimen. He seems like a very thoughtful guy, hardworking. You don't hear any bad word about him. It's just that there are sometimes guys who get drafted high as offensive tackles, and they don't make, they don't develop the way you would expect. I'm not saying that won't be the case, but I think that's an underrated huge element of this offseason. It's not going to be about just player acquisition. A guy like Evan Neal needs to be a lot better. And if he is, like, look out, because then they're going to have 2 great bookend tackles for the next decade. That's a beautiful place to be. But, there's a long road between here and there. Because, I think I said his rookie year definitely, raised some questions about where he's going to end up in his career.
All right, final question before your little one wakes up and decides to join the podcast. Your general thought, like anything else been top of mind for you? Have you been thinking about this the last 3 weeks? When we kind of step away, the mind tends to wander. You kind of think about things and, possible paths, things that you think are pivotal. Anything else this offseason that we haven't talked about that you really think is important that you've been kind of trying to figure out or think about as we head towards the combine and free agency?
No, I'll be honest. It's really been Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley have dominated so much. Like I said, a guy like Julian Love in another year would probably spend a lot more, ink and airtime talking about him, and it's just like an afterthought. Whenever you have it's rare to have a quarterback in the situation that Daniel Jones is in, where he's set to hit unrestricted free agency, kind of the type of season he had, the career he's had to date. It's really interesting. And that's why I think people kind of buckle up. I think these negotiations, we're going to try and cover them day to day, minute to minute. So there's going to be highs and lows. There's going to be numbers thrown out and everything like that. But I think at the end of the day, he's going to be here next year. So it's just a matter of what the terms are, how long term. But he's going to be the Giants quarterback opening day 2023. The path to get there is what's going to be fascinating. It's going to be fun. I love the offseason. I mean, I love the games, love all that, but the business side of it and the roster building side is really fun to track too. So it's going to be really interesting to see how all that shakes out.
Yeah, and look, I'll just say this, and then I'll get your comment. We'll say goodbye. We've seen a couple quarterbacks get to this situation in the last few years, Kirk Cousins being the main one.
Right.
Then Dak Prescott to an extent, right? He played on the tag, and then I think he got paid right before he was going to play on the second one, if I remember correctly.
I think so.
But, when those guys sign their long-term deals, I think a lot of fans are like, wow. And I think it's important to warn Giant fans that when a quarterback gets to unrestricted free agency like this, the ball is kind of in their court and they do hold a lot of leverage. So, and generally speaking, guys coming off their rookie deals, especially quarterbacks, just don't take, voluntary discounts. That's not how this world works. So I think Giant fans should just prepare that this is not going to be like an easy thing that it's like, oh yeah, let's just do this. And it's a lot of money. It's fine. I don't need to maximize it. I think fans have to be ready that this is going to be something that, it's going to be pretty eye-opening. And the process is probably going to be more complicated than people maybe thought it was going to be 3 or 4 months ago.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing to also kind of separate like the character and the business. Like, like Daniel Jones has been a team first guy from day one in the building. And whenever this contract resolves, he's going to be a team first guy. This isn't the time to be team first. It's the time to be Daniel Jones first. So people saying, oh, we should take less so they can build his receivers. It's not Daniel Jones's job to manage the Giants salary cap. That's Joe Schoen's job. His job is to make sure that generations of Daniel Joneses are, taken care of. And I know that sounds like, well, how much, what's the difference between 35 and 40 million a year? There's also a factor of competitiveness. Like these guys compete in every single thing they do. You're in the locker room. They compete about ping pong. So he doesn't want to sit here and take less money than this guy. He doesn't want to take less money than that guy. He wants to be in that class. And this is the only way to really measure it. It's like what your salary and what your contract is really how you're defined in terms of where you stack up amongst your peers. But yeah, they're not in the business of taking discounts. And I will say, like, Daniel Jones has always kept everything close to the vest. So we don't know exactly what's going on in any regard.
That is the understatement of the century, by the way.
So especially with his contract stuff, he's never said anything. Well, let's be honest. He's got feelings. He's got professional pride. When that 5th-year option got declined, that sting. You're pissed off about that. You're a competitor. You want to go prove them. So then he went out and feels like, listen, I had my best year. I led you guys to 9 wins. Like you kind of put me in a tough spot. You could have made my life a lot easier if I knew I had $22 million guaranteed waiting after last season. They didn't do that. There's no safety net. If he stunk, they would have moved along and said see you later. But he put them in this position. So now it's time to cash in. It's a business that works both ways. I think everyone always looks at it from the team side. These players are disposable like a snap of a finger. So you got to get yours when you can. He's in a great position leverage wise. And listen, I know people won't probably love how everything shakes out, and they might look at the final dollars and how that affects the Giants cap. Listen, Daniel Jones to an extent has to keep that in mind, I guess. But at the end of the day, he needs to take care of himself and then Joe Schoen do his job and fill out the rest of the roster.
Yeah, look, none of this is personal. Don't hold it against a team for letting go of a player when it's the right thing to do for them. Don't hold it against a player for trying to maximize their value. This is not personal. It's nobody's fault. It's just this negotiation. This is business. That's just kind of how it goes. And we're going to see how it plays out over the next few weeks. And make sure you follow Dan on Twitter. What's your Twitter account there, Dan? I should have it in front of me, but I do not.
The notification set up. It's Duggan21.
Make sure you go follow him on Twitter. Make sure you go subscribe to The Athletic. You guys have one of your first year for $6 deals working right now or something like that?
I'm sure there'll be something coming. I don't want to maybe hold around the draft. I think we usually hit it hard. So that's definitely probably if you're holding out, maybe do it to them. But otherwise, just sign up now. It'll be worth it.
Yeah, make sure you guys go check it out, Dan. Good stuff. It was all in the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by PSEG, energy efficiency for game time and anytime. Visit PSEG.com/Giants for discounts, rebates, and home energy assessments. For Dan Duggan, I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see you next time on the Giants Huddle podcast.